Welcome to the Q Podcast.
Q is about conversation.
If we're really concerned about ending poverty, we've got to be more concerned about creating justice.
Our cultural products as Christians need to both defy and resonate with the culture.
And God's doing amazing things. His church is expanding, his church is growing.
It's not what's the purpose of my life, it's what is the purpose that's been assigned.
Stay curious, think well, advance good. This is Q.
Welcome to another edition of the Q Ideas Podcast. This is Gabe Lyons. And as you know, we're going through a series of exposure to conversations we had at our Q&A event that is still available for any of you who want to watch. So many of you have come in and actually purchased that for $49 and been able to access all those talks. But now we're making it available to our Q Media subscribers. So if you're not a subscriber, you can hear and watch this hour and 15-minute conversation that we're going to show you 9 minutes of through this podcast today on the topic of digital discipleship. Now, we know discipleship's a critical function of the church. It's the thing we all know we're supposed to be doing, but how many of us are doing it? And how do you do it in an age where everybody's looking at their phones half the day and our screen time's at like 8 hours, 10 hours, 15 hours? As you look at the data on the next generation, the phone is glued to our hands. And can you actually disciple through a phone? Can you disciple through virtual events? Can you disciple through virtual church? Is there something about life on life that's critical? And if so, how are we going to achieve that? How are we going to achieve that in a COVID era where getting together in rooms is deemed unsafe? And it's important that we recognize some of those dangers, but that we also keep pushing the church forward. So how are we going to do all that? That was the conversation we had with Jon Tyson, lead pastor of Church of the City, New York, originally from Adelaide, Australia. He's been around the Q community for so many years, such a great thought leader. Combined with Jennie Allen. She's a Bible teacher, author, founder of If Gathering, passionate about discipleship. She's a New York Times bestselling author of multiple books, including her most recent, Get Out of Your Head. And then we had Annie Downs. Many of you know Annie F. Downs, who's a bestselling author, but also hosts the That Sounds Fun podcast. She's been a part of this Q podcast. So you'll love hearing from Annie because so much of her platform is digital. It's podcast, it's social media, it's getting on Instagram stories and reels and communicating that way. So this is all part of our cultural context, but what are the challenges that come with that? And you're going to get to hear debate, you're going to get to hear some disagreement here and people describing back and forth. What is the definition of discipleship? Can you really accomplish it that way? How do we balance all this out? Let's listen in now. Jon, you are somebody who's written a lot about discipleship. And I mean, just help us frame up what, in your view, discipleship is, why it's so important, and then we'll jump into some more specifics.
Okay, yeah. Dallas Willard in The Greater Mission said that really churches only have to ask two questions. Number one, what is your plan for making disciples? And number two, how is that plan going? Mm-hmm. Discipleship is the heart of the church. It's the thing that Jesus sort of told us to focus on. So it doesn't matter how much influence your church has, doesn't matter how much size, scope, resources. If your church is not good at making disciples, your church is not good, period. And so we have to see it's the central thing that Christians are called to be about. I would simply define a disciple as somebody who is learning to think and to live and to love like Jesus. So they are the old self, the self-life, is being conformed into the image of Jesus. Mm-hmm. So Paul says, I'm in the pains of childbirth until Christ is formed in you. So it's formation into the image of Jesus in all of life.
Yes, and as we look at our current context, we've had a couple conversations already throughout this gathering around a failure of discipleship. People not really understanding authority, power, what prayer is, where we go for the source of real truth. I want to ask each of you, Annie and Jennie, just how have you seen this context over the last few years either display where there's been a lack of discipleship? Let's just all start on the same page if we are, that there has been a failure of discipleship in our churches. And is that something you would agree with? And if you've seen that, how have you seen that start to show up?
I would absolutely agree with that. In fact, If Gathering was created for that reason, that we wanted to, specifically our secret mission statement that we don't put on our website is to reclaim discipleship as a means for Christ to change the world, because that's how he did it. And he spoke to the 5,000, but he spent his days and his years with 12. And so there was strategy in that. And I think as a leader of a massive organization where I get to mobilize people to do something, the thing we mobilize people to do at If Gathering is within the context of a local church to make disciples who make disciples. Right. At the end of If Gathering every year, everybody thinks we're sexy and cool. I'm like, listen, we are not that sexy and cool. We are doing old things, hopefully well, and we are training people to actually do the things that Jesus said to do. And so discipleship for me, and now it's interesting because I'm often holding microphones. I've got a podcast, I've got books, I've got all these things that are not life on life. And yet every single thing I build, I know that it is simply a tool for people to do life on life relational ministry. I'm not confused about my job. Like, I am the servant to the people in the trenches doing the real work of ministry. Yeah. I am not building a platform for myself. I'm building tools. Whether I do a podcast or a huge event, it is simply a tool in the hands of lay people that are building disciples in their neighborhoods, in their churches. That is where the world is going to be changed. What got me excited about this today was that we've spent a lot of time, and I've loved being here, Gabe. The content is incredible because we've got to be having these conversations. But we've spent so far a lot of time about talking about what's broken. And what I pray this is our way out. Because the truth is, there is a way out, and it's not new, it's old. And I wanted to show y'all something real quick just to kind of start this conversation. But this is what I believe. Even though I lead hundreds of thousands of women, this is what I teach them every year. This is what we talk about. So this is, I've probably used these slides like, I don't know how many times, a lot. Okay, so this is what happens. If each person, I lead 100,000 people at If minimum at an event gathering every year. So if those 100,000, so let's just take me. If I'm making 2 disciples this year and that's winning in my real life, 2 people I love and know, and then the next year they each make 2, we know this multiplies pretty quickly. So let's just see, pretty quickly we're getting to 62 within 3 years. Within 5 years of everybody discipling 2 people, we're now at 242 people in 5 years, just me. The 2 people I've discipled and that they're discipling. But now I'm getting to lead 100,000 people. Every week on a podcast, at a big event, I get to lead a lot of people. Now, if they all would just do this, what John just described as discipleship, the church would be okay. I mean, this is what happens. Within, 100,000 people doing this, we have, what's the next slide? 25 million people discipled within 5 years. Like, that's how we change the world. Like, we don't need to be confused. It is through discipleship. But those of us with platforms of any size, whether it's a church or a podcast or an event, we just have to realize this is what we're helping people do. And if they could believe this and buy into it. But it's got to be, to me, it's got to be life on life. And this might be where Annie and I spar a little, because she really believes discipleship's happening online, which we might get in a fight about. But Annie, you go.
Well,
I don't have a closer teammate than Jennie.
Yeah.
And we don't totally agree on this.
Yeah.
Which is fun that we're together on this. Yeah.
But I would also say, when you ask Gabe if discipleship is working, where there is a lack of wisdom, there's a lack of discipleship. Mm-hmm. And so when you see people doing unwise things, my first question is, who's leading them? Mm-hmm. Who are they answering to? Because if they're not having to answer to someone, that's why they're being dumb.
Yeah.
And so yes, I think there is a discipleship problem. Now, what I will tell you is I am so sure that what we do online is leading people to Christ and is discipling them in a way that I give my life to do that. Now, do I have someone in town that disciples me and that I disciple? Yes. Yeah. There is life on life, but I am telling y'all, when I just said this to John, all I do on my podcast is talk about how I'm reading the Gospels, and tens of thousands of people start reading the Gospels with me. Mm-hmm. That is discipleship. Mm-hmm. They don't call me that. I don't call them that. But can I sit and talk with all of them about what happened in Mark 4? No, I can't. So it's not not life on life. But I am telling you, we can use the internet and our social media
I agree with that.
to disciple people toward Christ, and believe that Jennie and Jon, through their church, are bringing people around them that when they go, you know what, I do listen to this podcast, or I follow this girl on Instagram, and when I follow her, she told me to read the Gospels, and then Jon taught on that same chapter. I wonder if that woman I get coffee with would talk about it with me.
Yes.
So we are actually a team, but I am very sure, and I'm very sure that people in their 20s and 30s think they're being discipled online.
Yeah.
Whether it's what we call it, 40 plus, the 24-year-old thinks she's being discipled.
Well,
But I also think that's part of the problem. And I think that's where we
Yes.
might disagree.
That's okay that's part of the problem. I agree with that.
Yes, I agree with everything you said too, by the way. I think what we've got, though, is the issue of, sorry, Gabe, we've got the issue of, I just want to get to this core issue because I think it's so important before we keep going, that we've got a generation rising up that thinks that's discipleship. Like, that's also a problem. Because I'm sorry, when I was 18 years old, Michelle Boast at Campus Crusade for Christ got in my face and said, learn master plan of evangelism. Learn what it looks like to understand and teach your Bible. Go do it in the Pi-Fi house. So I was doing that, coming back and forth. Then I walked into a meeting one day and I was really arrogant and I was talking about some things, and she looked at me and said, just like you have people that do, hey, Jennie, you took all the oxygen out of that room. And I needed to hear that. Mm-hmm. As a leader, I had to grow up through that. And I think that's what I'm talking about, is that rubbing life on life.
Yeah, well, we know that, so I think the average person on Instagram right now, they're reading 27 minutes of content a day from Instagram and 11 minutes from all other sources. So we know that discipleship's happening. I mean, to your point, Annie, whatever we have as inputs into our life that's guiding us, that's telling us this is what life's about, this is how you find meaning. So people are being discipled. Technology's part of that. Social media is part of it. Podcasts are part of it. But Jon, going back to your life on life vision of that in New York City, where you've been building a church for so many years, you know, it hasn't always been the thing churches wanted to talk about. I would say a decade ago, I mean, everybody would say, yeah, we do discipleship, but the rigor of discipleship on a daily basis in groups, and what the chart, you know, Jennie has shown of one person discipling two, and us starting to create formation in people's lives. How have you come to find that, and especially with younger generations, because that's a lot of the people that are part of your church, what has been the challenge of it, but also what's been the reward of it? And describe what formation looks like in a church of the city type environment.
Well, I wanted to start by saying I love your thoughts. I think they're really important. We've got to have multiple imports. And so what you basically need is a web of reinforcing mechanisms that are pushing you towards, you know, the knowledge of God and a heart for God. So all of those inputs I think are important. I just want to pause for a second and say everything we're saying is true, but it's certainly not that easy.
Yeah.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation, and I'm telling you, it got more alive even from this point forward. And so I want you to hear the whole thing. And you can do that by going to qideas.org/QA. When you go there, we're giving you free 30 days. So if you're not on Q Media right now, 30-day trial, go watch this. But there's so many other conversations that happened at Q&A you're going to have access to. Things like progressive Christianity and church history, censorship and conspiracy theories, prayer and revival, discussion with the next gen, a whole conversation around mental health for leaders. How do we think well about that, and suicide right now? I mean, so many topics and conversations that these days are harder to find. And our goal with Q Media is to be creating space where you can learn, you can listen, you can understand, but you can also dialogue with those that are leading with you or that you're discipling, that are part of the people you're responsible to steward, and that you're helping them think well about the world today, about the issues we're facing. Because if we as the church aren't thinking well, we have no hope to help others think well and to understand even biblically how to ground these conversations. I was convicted when I heard Jon Tyson in this particular moment that we gave to you. He said, discipleship is the heart of the church. It's the thing that Jesus told us to focus on. But then he went on to say, it doesn't matter how much influence your church has. It doesn't matter how much size, scope, and resources. If your church is not good at making disciples, your church is not good, period. What a convicting statement for so many of us who are part of churches or maybe leaders at churches where for many years, maybe the wrong things have been the things that we've been counting. And we need to reassess that, and we need to double down on discipleship. We all know that to be true, but are we doing it? Well, how's it showing up in your life? How's it showing up in those that you're leading? And in discipleship, not only do we need to be being discipled with mentors, coaches, people in our life that are taking us to the Word of God, but we also have to be pouring out, not only into those around us, but our next generation, our children. And so at the heart of today's conversation, I hope is something that inspires you, encourages you, maybe challenges you or convicts you as you continue to lead forward and consider in this year, what are you shifting? What are you adjusting? How are you going to use the tools that we've been given to advance what God's called you to do? But how are we going to make sure we don't just relegate everything to digital, that we understand the power of life on life, the power of people watching what we do every day more than what we tell them to do? So I hope this encourages you and your spirit, and you're exhorted today as you head forward into a world that needs more discipleship than ever.